Hey there, guys. Panobi here, bringing you my Karakuri deck profile, advanced format 2024. This has really become, I guess, the second video of a series where I'm going to be taking you through my experience with a Karakuri deck, refining it, and really pushing it to the limits. You can see from a video, the first iteration in this series that I've posted about 3 months ago. As a returning player from about a year ago, I had been playing mostly Katakuri, creating and refining that deck, and I had quite a bit of success with it. It was able to compete even with some top decks, but it did have a few major weaknesses, and I think by iterating the deck to include the Super Heavy Samurai package, because of how many one-card starters this adds, we've been able to mitigate some of those weaknesses. So I think there's been big enough changes to the deck that it warrants a new video where I can break down this new profile and get into some of those details with you. So just to kind of give you our action plan for this video, I'm going to really quickly kind of recap my history as a Katakuri player, but most importantly, my recent history, where I'm going to talk about my regional results, taking this list to the Florida Kissimmee Regionals, March 9th, 2024, and what those results looked like. And then we'll skip ahead after that to our sort of just deck overview and deck game plan, just sort of a recap of why you would play this deck and what you're doing when you're playing this deck, what your overall objective is. And then we can get into the real core of the deck, our card by card breakdown. We can show some test hands, and finally kind of dive into the think tank and explore some of those extra card options in case you either don't have access to some of these cards, or if you want to maybe try to iterate the deck for yourself. What are some other things that we can think of together? So that's what I want to do here. Again, if you haven't seen the original video, there may be some additional insights or details, especially in the card by card breakdown section, that you might find there. So I would encourage you, if you have any sort of real passion for this sort of deck, to go check that out and see what value you can still gain even from that older profile. So jumping straight in, just as my history as a Katakuri player, I'll keep it short. I've been playing the deck since its inception, for over 10 years, and I've had some local tournament results even in 2024 when the deck was no longer relevant. And I just think that the core deck is very fun. It's very nostalgic, but I truthfully think that it has some advantages and it has a place where it can be competitive even in the 2024 landscape. And I think, speaking to that, I'm going to talk about my recent history, where I went to the March 9th, 2024 Kissimmee Regionals here in Florida, and even though my overall results were not that great, I think it shows the potential for this deck. And first of all, my results were 3 wins, 2 losses, and 4 draws in a 9-round event with 340 players, and I placed 96th. So 96th out of 340 players with Katakuri. And frankly, I think the main problem I had during the event was just that I was not familiar, as a sort of returning older school player, with the newer time rules. Even though I realized those have been in place for a few years, I wasn't familiar with the fact that at the end of the 45 minutes, whichever player has the least amount of life points is essentially gonna, at the end of the 45 minutes, it's going to go into time, and then you only have until the end of that phase where the player with the least amount of life points is going to lose. So I was not prepared for that, and because of that, I got 4 different draws throughout the event. But I will say, all of which, our deck was in a commanding position, and had I had access to the only change I've made in the list since the regional event, which is adding Gagaga Cowboy to the side deck, if we had access to Gagaga Cowboy or any other burn option, which there are a few we could choose, we would have won all of those matches. Now, of course, if I had won some of those draws early on, the matchmaking would have been different. So it's not as quick and easy to say that I would have just had, 7 wins and 2 losses, which would have been a tied record for the second place in the event. It doesn't work that simply, but I do think it goes to show that the deck can certainly be competitive. And I did add a little bit of a breakdown here just for anyone that is a little bit more interested. Let me pull that up here. This is just a quick little graphic that I created for my results. So round 1, you can see we won the die roll. We had great luck with the die roll in the early rounds, and then it fell off and it about evened out. But in a 9-round event with 340 players with tier elements, we went first. In game 3, we ended up running out of time. Again, if I had access to a way to deal life points damage, we could have secured that match. Round 2, Runic Sprite, same thing. Round 3, Madolce, we were able to just secure the win. Round 4, Branded Chimera. Again, same thing. We could have won the game if we were able to deal any sort of life points damage. Branded Despia, even though we lost the die roll, we were able to actually win 2-0. We were able to just power through and break boards. Labyrinth, we lost the die roll. It was a close match, but the opponent was able to Nibiru me twice, and Nibiru and Droll, and we weren't able to play through Nibiru plus Droll, and so we lost that round. Round 7 against Fire Kings, we lost the die roll, but we were still able to win. We were able to win 2-1. They did get game 1. They set up, and we weren't able to break it. They had multiple hand traps. And then after that, games 2 and 3, we performed well. Actually, I have a positive record against Fire Kings playing online, which I think is one of the encouraging things about the Karakuri deck this format. Round 8, we played Voiceless Voice. We won the die roll, but we still managed to lose the match. That's the only game where that happened. Again, opponent had all the right hand traps at the right times. The games were quite close. They became low economy games, and they were able to just get enough recursion through the barrier continuous spell to power through and win the match. And then in game 9, we played Goblin Biker, which is just quite funny. Just because I playing 2 kind of roguish decks, it was a fun match. And again, we lost the die roll, but we could have won if we had any way to deal life points damage. So I felt very encouraged, even though for a more competitive player, these would be considered poor results. But to go 3-2-4, knowing especially that these draws in future takings of this deck to a competitive level event that we could win, I actually felt very encouraged. So jumping back into the profile, let's go ahead and just kind of recap what our overall deck overview and game plan is. So the main overview for this deck, why would you play Karakuri in 2024? Of course, a lot of it is still going to be nostalgia. It's going to be if you want to play something a little bit different. It's if you just love the beautiful artwork, if you love playing some different machine decks, if you want to play something different that can surprise maybe your friends or local play group. But the deck does truly have some competitive advantages that I don't want to totally minimize or sweep under the rug just by saying that we enjoy nostalgia and being different. One thing that this deck does well is that it has access to 3 completely separate engines, right? You have our Karakuri engine, which has 3 1-card combos, or you could say starters, but they truly can combo off by themselves, which is Inishichi. And then for the Super Heavy Samurai engine, which I think people will be a lot more familiar with, you've got 6 different 1-card combos, Wakashi and Motorbike, which can get Wakashi. So 6 different 1-card combos. And then you have the Vernisylph engine, which can give you so much recursion, so much extension, so much ability to play through hand traps. So it has some cons, to be sure. Vernisylphs play into hand traps. You have to pay a monster for cost, and then if you get Ash Blossomed, Ghost Spell, which has become popular in side decks, if you get Drolled, they certainly can play into hand traps, but they work so great as extension pieces. They can let you reestablish boards even through Nibiru and other types of interruption. So they have a lot of extension power, and it's a little bit of a high risk, high reward scenario with the Vernisylph cards. And another benefit to this deck is that, again, you have non-linear combo lines. This is something I highlighted in the first video, but the fact that we can switch between our three engines makes it very hard for people to predict exactly what we're going to do, because we don't need to do the same thing in the same order each game. And especially when they're not going to be overly familiar with the cards. I can say in my 9-round event, basically every single player had to read Vernisylph cards. They weren't familiar with them. Most players were familiar with the Super Heavy Samurai cards, and no one was familiar with the Karakuri cards. I think that was another reason why many of my matches went to time, is because so many players had to read many of my effects, which I actually think is a strength for our deck, because I think that by going into time, we actually have a lot of access to cards that can deal damage, so that we can take those matches in our favor. And I would say another main strength I've realized about this deck through so much playtesting is that we have access to, and I guess let me apologize briefly if all of the, I'm showing this through Dueling Nexus, and it has these alternate rarities. So if that's distracting for people, I apologize. But we have access to Karakuri Berebu, which is a spammable, soft once per turn, targeted banish. And I've realized just how powerful that is, especially against the Fire King matchup. And some of these other matchups where more and more cards are having these extra baked in effects of banish it from the graveyard. When it gets destroyed, you can do X, Y, and Z. Berebu plays around all of those things, and obviously you have some struggles when you can't target things, but otherwise, this is actually a really big advantage to the deck, having access to soft once per turn spammable quick effect banishes. So now that we've talked about our sort of overview, what's the deck's game plan? How do we win with this deck? And it's really the same as before. We're putting up the same type of end boards that you've seen in our first iteration of the deck, even without the Super Heavy Samurai cards. You're really just focused on building a huge, unbreakable, stereotypical end board with a lot of different negates to it. Something that a lot of combo decks or rogue decks like to do, and we like to do it too. And I think the advantage that this deck has is, we have access to the Naturia cards, Naturia Beast, or in the side deck, Naturia Barkion. Those are huge advantages. The number of wins I get strictly off of getting access to Naturia Beast is a huge advantage for the deck. And we also have access to, very easy to spam Appaloosa, very easy to access Baron de Fleur. So huge end board potential for this deck. So now that we've recapped and kind of all gotten to the same page, let's just go ahead and dive in. Let's get into the card for card here. So starting off, we have 3 copies of Inishichi. Inishichi's the Stratos of the deck. It's the Searcher. It's the 1-card starter for our Karakuri combo line. And I guess I should just briefly say, I really think about this deck in 4 parts. I think of it as 3-part engine, 1-part non-engine. I realize the numbers don't exactly math up that way, but just broadly speaking, we have our Karakuri combo, our Karakuri engine, our Super Heavy Samurai engine, our Vernisylph engine, and our board breakers / hand traps, our non-engine. Obviously, they don't all exactly match up to 10, but that's how I sort of compartmentalize the deck in my mind. So for our Karakuri engine, we have our starter, our 1-card combo, our Inishichi. Inishichi can grab Kanamzan, which can Synchro 7 for Beret. which can grab a Shirokinichi, which can grab a Beredo. We can banish the Shirokinichi to draw one off Beredo. The Beredo pulls another Shirokinichi to just go 9. So just off Inishichi by itself, you can get access to a Berebu on the board plus a draw plus another body, whether that's, an Inishichi to get an extra summon, whether, whatever the case may be. That by itself can put up a pretty decent interruption. Then we have the 1 copy of Kanamzan. So we max this out because it is a starter, because it's a 1-card combo. Kanamzan, you'll notice we've dropped down to 1 copy. So this is a card that I used to run at 2. And I've realized you really only need 1 copy, especially in this build. A main change to this build is we're not as focused on level 3 and level 5 pieces to have to span into 8, because now we have access to our super heavy samurai line where we can do 4 and 4 and some of these other things. So we have some other synchro component options to where we don't need to put Kanamzan at 2. We can create more space for non-engine or for different engines. Then we got our 3 copies of Shirokinichi. Still running this at 3. You can run it at 2, and I've certainly play tested it at 2, but I'll just be quite frank, the deck becomes so much easier and smoother to play when you run it at 3. You don't find yourself in like awkward spots where you've drawn it when you were banking on summoning it, and some of these other things. If you really want to, you can, playtest for yourself, cutting it down to 2 and creating more space for non-engine. But there are a lot of advantages to having it at 3, such as being able to step synchro more by using Beret, to better fuel your graveyard, to get better draws into other engines like Verna Sylphs or hand traps through Tunneler at the end of your combo line. It also comes in handy if the deck or if the game ever becomes a grind game in any respect, having access to multiple copies. So I'm going to continue to play it at 3, and that's why we kind of have maxed it out there. 1 copy of Nanishi. This is a card that we were able to cut down again from 2 to 1. And another main reason here is because now we have 6 starters that do not require a normal summon. That's really a huge change for the deck overall, is the fact that the deck no longer is as reliant on its normal summon. So Nanishi's effect, which gives us the extra normal summon, while it's still very useful and we want to make sure we have access to it, it's not as premium as it was in our previous version. But you'll see in test hands, I mean, there's still a major place for her in the deck. 1 copy of Nishipachi, bread and butter. He's usually the first guy you're going to bring out. It comes up in your basic super heavy samurai line. He is going to get you access to so many draws. The fact that it's just his effect combos with Beredo, both being soft once per turn, and it's just going to continue to let you draw cards. He's absolutely mandatory. The 1 copy of Karakuri Kashin. Now, this is a card that you could argue cutting, you could argue side decking if you want to. But we're playing it for a few reasons. Number 1, obviously it's going to be searchable off of... It's our main search target for Inishichi if we're not doing the 1-card combo line. And the fact that it gives you an effect negate, the fact that it can banish itself from the grave so it doesn't conflict with our super heavy cards, to change a battle position is pretty useful too. People really don't see that effect coming, even if they've read it multiple times. There's just so much to read. There's only so much brain power. People forget about things. This is also a great answer to Typhon. If you set up a big board and your opponent goes to try to play through it and they try to go into Typhon, having access to this is great. It can also do well against, Fenrir, so that they can't attack. And there's quite a few uses for this card, and I'm gonna keep it in the main deck. But moving on to that's our 10-card Karakuri line. Now we're gonna go ahead and talk about the major change to the deck. Something that people have commented in my past video, saying that they've been exploring super heavy samurai. They wanted to see how I iterated the deck with it. This is something I had been iterating around the time that I posted the last video. And the major thing that kind of kept me away from it for a while is I didn't quite honestly, I didn't recognize the interaction with Prodigy and Vernisylph cards. Even though he's a dark monster, we're not actually using his monster effect in this deck. We're only using his pendulum effect. And because the pendulum effect counts as a spell effect, it in no way conflicts with our Vernisylph cards, which lock us into Earth. So you are still able to use his pendulum scale to do the one card combo, and it's not going to conflict with your Vernisylphs. The only thing that will conflict is if you've used your Vernisylphs, you cannot use his effect where when you synchro with him, he cannot be added to the pendulum scale. So other than that, there's no conflict. And so that's a huge advantage. The main weakness, I suppose you could say, if there is one, to this line is, of course, if you're using Motorbike, it immediately opens you up to Droll and things like that. But having access to 6 more one-card combos, one-card starters for the deck compared to our original 3, where we were immediately having to go into instant fusions, ready fusions, which, especially playing in regional level events, the ready fusion and instant fusions, paying that 1,000 life points becomes a huge weakness. So overall, this makes the deck a lot more viable, a lot more robust. We'll talk in like the test hands about the lines, but the fact that you have to play 3 Motorbike because it's a starter that grabs the 3 Wakiwashi. The Wakiwashi grabs the Big Benkei to your other zone, then summons itself. The Big Benkei searches the 1 Soul Gaia booster, which is why we're only playing 1 copy. It's searchable. And then you use the Soul Gaia booster effect to equip, to summon itself. You can Synchro 8. You can go into Beredo, Chainlink 1 Beredo, Chainlink 2 Wakiwashi. Wakiwashi will go into your Pendulum Scale. You'll summon Nishipachi. Nishipachi will change battle position to let you draw 1. And so just off of any one of these cards, you get access to a Beredo, a Nishipachi, a draw 1, and having your Pendulum live. And even if that was all you had, you could then link into Ballista to grab Box, to get Inoshichi, then you could Inoshichi. You could either do the 1-card combo, or you could just search Nishipachi, and then you could Pendulum summon the Nishipachi and the Box to go 7 with Beret, etc., etc. So you can see how the cards play really nice together, and even though it's not going to do what the Super Heavy Samurai deck does, which is trying to set up like an early negate by going into like a Quick Baron DeFlora, that kind of thing. So it makes the deck, our deck compared to a Super Heavy Samurai deck, it does make us more vulnerable to something like Nibiru or potentially some other hand trap. The advantage is we can put up end boards with a lot more negates, with some more dangerous cards like Naturia Beast. And because we have the 3 different engines, if we get interrupted in the middle of one engine, we actually have a lot more recovery power. So even though we get punished more by things like Nibiru, we actually play through cards like Ash Blossom, Effect Veiler. We play through those cards better, Imperm. And so it's not just we're taking a weaker deck like Karakuri and making it somewhat playable by using a better deck like Super Heavy Samurai. That's really not what's happening here. We're taking, yes, a very a archetype like Super Heavy that has a lot of power concentrated in a few cards, and we're incorporating that power into our Katakuri deck. But we certainly have our own unique advantages that we're bringing to the table, and it's certainly by no means like a worse Super Heavy Samurai deck. And I think that the gameplay makes that clear, but I can understand as an outsider coming in that might be a thought you'd have. So I kind of want to outline that. 2 copies of the Big Benkei. It'd be great to only play 1, but then if you draw it, then you're in a really hard spot. You need for the Wakiwashi to pull a Big Benkei from the deck in order to summon itself. So it's not enough to just have the Big Benkei and a Wakiwashi in your hand. You need to be able to pull one from the deck, and so for that reason, you need to play 2. Keep in mind, again, with the Vernisylphs, even if we have an extra copy in hand as like a sort of dead card, it just becomes Vernisylph fodder, and that's one of the advantages to Vernisylphs. We talked about the 1 Soul Gaia booster, and now getting into a few sort of non-engine, well, still engine, but non-Katakuri, non-super heavy samurai machine monsters that sort of round out the deck. You got the 1 copy of Regulus, which, if you're familiar with our last strategy, we can pull with Infinitrack Riverstormer. We can now pull with Clifford Genius to use as an end board. It also works great in our opening hands. You know, if we pitch Motorbike and then, you know, whether they hand trap it or not, we can then just Regulus the Motorbike, and now the rest of our play is protected. So, 1 Regulus. 1 Ancient Gearbox, which is crucial for the deck just because it can grab not only our Infinitrack Tunneler to get us extra draws to draw into another one of our engines that we haven't maximized yet, or it can grab us into our Inishichi, which is pretty common. Then we have, of course, the 1 Tunneler, our Pot of Avarice. Gotta play it. Absolutely puts in so much work every game, lets you draw into more hand traps, more engine pieces. 1 copy of, now these 2 last cards you could optionally cut. I'm opting to play them as sort of additional extenders, but you can certainly cut these if you want to include more non-engine in your deck. So we've got the 1 copy of Pegasus. This plays really nice with all of these cards because it's a level 4. So level 4 and level 4 will let us do our Barreto spam. Motorbike can make itself level 4, so these can both be level 4 to go into Barreto. Stampede, of course, can still level modulate with our Kanamzan to go into Riverstormer. Really, Stampede can just help you clean up your end boards and get into whatever pieces you want. It also works really great if you open this, because let's say you Motorbike and they ash it, summon Stampede, you're good. Let's say you end up getting your Wakwashi on the board, and then you do your big Benkei and you try to Benkei search. Let's say you got drolled. You Motorbike for Wakwashi, you get drolled. You can still play the Wakwashi, summon Stampede. So it plays really nicely when your plays get partially interrupted. It can help you recover and extend, and so for that reason we're including it in the deck. Then 1 copy of Road Roller. I really considered Road Roller versus something like Revolution Synchron or another monster extender. Opted to go with Road Roller because it does have some unique advantages. There are times when using the Road Roller to go into Riverstormer to essentially set all of your opponent's monsters to defense position and lose 1,000 defense can be really relevant. It comes in handy against decks that don't play don't have a lot of link end boards. So it's not that popular right now against things like Fire King, etc. But against certain decks, it can be quite impactful. And then also just the fact that we can use it in conjunction with some of our other cards like the Shirokinichi and like our Tunneler to just use it as a free extender. The fact that it plays nice with some of our new tuners in the deck, it gives us another non-tuner that we can synchro with, is why we opted to go with Road Roller. So going into our last engine, we've got the Vernisylphs. Now, I did cut 1 copy of Misting Seedling just because I felt like there wasn't truly enough space. I was running 2 and 2, so 2 Flourishing Hills and 2 Misting Seedlings, but I opted to just go for 3 Flourishing Hills. Overall, this deck in general is sort of a greedier build. This is a pretty greedy build. If you wanted to, you could cut a lot of the extra engine cards and extenders, so things like Stampede, things like Road Roller, things like multiple copies of your Vernisylph engine to create more hand traps and more non-engine for the deck. So we got the 2 Searchers. We have the Awakening Forest, which is like our Foolish Burial, our Thawing Mountain, which is like our draw, and our Flowering Fields, which can add a card back to hand. And for more details, you can visit the first deck profile on these. And wrapping up the deck, we got our non-engine. So we're still only playing 8 non-engine slots. This is slightly increased from our last build. I have playtested, I was playtesting for a long time, 10 and 11 non-engine slots. And quite frankly, I just feel like when you're playing this deck, you are at a slight disadvantage still compared to like the full power decks like Fire Kings with Wanteds and some of these things. So I feel like the better strategy is to, when you're going into like a big event, is yes, you're going to have to hope for a little bit of luck. You're going to have to win some die rolls. But I want to play more of a pile deck, more engine to play through interruptions, hand traps, OTK, etc., and not rely too much on just like 1 or 2 extra non-engine slots. I think hand traps become more powerful when you pair them. And so if you're not going to be running like 12 to 15 hand traps, I feel like we're okay just with a decent number, like 8, to just try to slow them down a little bit, and then just use more engine to play through their board. Especially because in the current meta, most decks are not setting up at a higher level event. They're actually not setting up unbreakable end boards. They're playing more kind of these like mid-range end boards that you can actually play through with more extenders. So that was sort of the thought process. But I will show you really quickly, if for some reason you want to play a more hand trap heavy variant, I did actually prepare one just to show you guys. You could actually cut some of these extra Vernisov cards, some of these extra extenders like we talked about. You could cut the Karakuri trap that you don't absolutely need, and you can run a heavy hand trap, triple Ash, triple Valor, triple Nib, triple Droll, and then I threw a Ghost Bell in here, but this could be Ghost Mourner, this could be whatever, a third Fenrir, etc. You can actually run a heavy hand trap variant of the deck. So that's one thing that I think that having the super heavy samurai line with the 6 starters has kind of helped fix for the deck, is that it's created the ability to run more non-engine if you want to. So going into the extra deck. The extra deck is largely the same. It's our main synchro package. We've got Baron de Fleur as an Omni Negate end board. Works really well in the grind game to continue popping cards. We have easy access to it with our level 1 tuners, and the fact that we're always going into Berebu for level 9. We've got Berebu, absolutely major card for the deck. The fact that we have that spammable quick effect banish is huge. Also, the fact that it makes it so our defense position monsters can't be run over by battle is also pretty huge. I've actually had multiple players misplay where they normal summon and then they try to run over our Naturia Beast before executing their plays, and they just totally don't even read or remember Berebu's effect that our defense position monsters can't be destroyed by battle. That happens very frequently. I'd say, very frequently. 10-20% of my matches that happens, which for such a major misplay I'd say is pretty frequent. 3 copies of Beredo. You absolutely need 3. This is non-negotiable. Don't try to cut a Beredo for like your favorite card. Don't do it. You absolutely need 3. You will go through them in every game. Don't do it. 1 copy of Beret. You only really need 1. It's still very useful just because we do have a lot of level 4 monsters that we can go with our level 3 tuners to synchro into. Also, having access to the battle position change is nice. It also helps to be able to go 7 and 3 into Baron de Fleur sometimes. So 1 Beret, I think that he still warrants his spot. 1 copy of Musashi. This is for the Musashi line. This is for if you don't draw into a super heavy samurai engine or that gets cut off. You can use just one of your Inishichi starters plus one of your Vernisil starters to pop off. I have an example of that in my previous video. The 1 copy of Naturia Beast, one of the main benefits of playing the deck. Now we get into a few optional cards. So 1 copy of Typhon. Typhon did come up for me in my event, and it comes up when playing online. I have, grinded this deck through multiple different accounts to Diamond and Dueling Nexus, and Typhon comes up. I will say a lot of the games where you need Typhon, you're probably losing anyway. So this is definitely a card that you could consider replacing for something else. But sometimes he does come in clutch, and so for now he's warranting the spot. 1 copy of Riverstormer. We don't actually make River Stormer as much as we used to because we've cut down the Kanamzan to only one copy. So again, this is a card you could consider cutting. More often in our newer build, we're searching our Regulus through Clifford Genius. So this is a card that is sort of on the chopping block along with our Road Roller, for if some interesting new options come out in the future. These are some cards that we might consider replacing them with. But like I said, it can still come in handy a lot of times. You can do different plays to use it to either add a motorbike to your hand or to send a tunneler to the graveyard, in addition to grading your Regulus. So there are definitely multiple lines of play where it comes up, where we still want to have access to it. So it definitely warrants the spot, but it's on the fence if some other stuff comes around. One copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. So this might be a question mark for some people. The reason I'm playing this is because I actually don't own an SP Little Knight, and so because I don't own SP Little Knight, and I had been playing the deck online with an SP Little Knight for so long, when I went to go play in my event, I needed to come up with something to replace it with, and I chose Underworld Goddess, which is a card I had been playtesting and tinkering with, and ultimately I liked the performance of this card so much that I don't even plan to replace it with SP Little Knight even if I had it. And the reason is because this card actually helps me out with a lot of decks that we have a problem with. So things like Raid Raptor, where they, some of these tower decks where they have cards that are unaffected. Our deck struggles with that because we're playing essentially all monsters. Minus our Karakuri History, we're playing all monsters. So we don't have access to some of these other outs that other decks might play. And also, since we have a somewhat limited hand trap lineup, we're not always going to be able to stop them before they get on their end board. So having a card that can deal with end boards like Underworld Goddess has been a benefit. It did come up. You can use it to deal. I didn't play Raid Raptors in the event, but I've played them online where this has come up. It's ironic, or I don't know if it's ironic, but it's come up against Pearly. It's really kind of funny because you end up having to just make a board of a bunch of weenies and then link into Underworld Goddess to out Pearly sometimes. It's come up against things like Sharks, just like some random rogue stuff. Sharks have a link combo where they can make a guy that's unaffected, and so you end up needing Underworld Goddess to out that. In the event, I actually used this to win one of my games against Fire Kings, by just absorbing his link monster and swinging for game. So again, a card that's sort of on the chopping block. It originally was in here as an SP Little Knight filler, but it does have some unique advantages, and especially with Raid Raptors becoming more popular, I'm going to consider keeping this card while I look at other options. Appaloosa, this is our bread and butter turn 1 play. I actually side this out now in games 2 and 3 for Gaga Cowboy, but in the event I was not running Cowboy, or else I wouldn't have so many draws. But yeah, Underworld Goddess. If you win the die roll, it just helps you get the match easily. One copy of Clifford Genius. This is one of our new options for the deck. We're adding it along with our Super Heavy because when 2 monsters get summoned at the same time to zones that it points to, you can essentially add either the Tunneler, the Road Roller, or the Regulus. And so being able to recruit the Regulus through Genius is really nice. It also just helps because sometimes you need to clear your own board to get some stuff out of your way. And so this lets you do that. And then last but not least, the Ancient Gear Ballista that you guys are going to be familiar with. So going into the side deck, some of this is going to be similar. Some of it's a little different. We have one copy of Naturia Barkion. This is strictly just here for Labyrinth or maybe other trap decks like Trap Tricks or Dynamorphia. I have like a player at my locals that plays Dynamorphia, and without this card, you are just absolutely cooked. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it in my Labyrinth matchup, which I lost in the event, but this card is still definitely useful against Labyrinth, which is enough for represented deck to warrant the spot, in my opinion. Now, we got the one copy of Gaga Cowboy. This is because we can easily make this with our Vernisylphs. One of the reasons why out of our 6 Vernisylph starters, the one that we cut was Misting Seedling, and the ones we kept were Flourishing Hills, is because this is level 4, which helps us make Naturia Beast with the 1 and 4, and it helps us make Gaga Cowboy by overlaying 4. The fact that you can overlay the Vernisylphs to make this, along with our Ancient Gearbox, along with our Soul Gaia Booster, along with our Railroad Stampede, along with Motorbike after it level modulates, we have so many ways to get access to it. It's an Earth monster, so we can use it through Vernisylph, and doing 800, I think it's going to help us win a lot of those matches that originally would have been draws. Next, we got one copy of Magical Hound. Still like this card. This card you can search through Ancient Gearbox, and then you can also search it through Urgent Schedule, and it's great because it can out different types of lockdowns that your opponent sets up on you. It's good in the Voiceless Voice matchup. You can bounce the trap card, or if you need to, the spell card. I had that come up in my match. You can use it to bounce things like Summon Limit, but keep in mind that this effect is a summoning effect, so you would have to have only summoned one time to be able to do that. So it's kind of rare for that to come up. But you can use it to out things like that. You can use it to out just other sort of floodgates. You can use it like some of the dinosaur decks that run like Secret Village, like stuff like that. You can out a lot of these different options with Magical Hound, and so I think it warrants the one copy. Then we got the one copy of Revolution Synchron. Now this might seem like a really strange card to be in the side deck, and it's really just because it pairs so nicely with Urgent Schedule. We have a very linear side deck pattern. In almost every match, we side out these 11 cards. So the Super Heavy Samurai cards, the Regulus, and the Cash-In. These 11 cards come out almost every game 1, and then we put in these 11 cards in almost every, not the Magical Hound, these 11 cards almost every game 2. So if you're seeing Urgent Schedules and Imperms and you're wondering, how does that play well with the Super Heavy Samurais? It doesn't. We side deck the Super Heavy Samurai portion completely out of the deck, and we use our Urgent Schedule, which is a huge power card, to gain advantage, and that's why we put the Revolution Synchron in the deck, because he's our primary target with the Urgent Schedules. And again, not in the main deck, just because he's a tuner. We already have so many extra tuners that we put him in the side deck. One copy of Triple Tactics Talent in the side. Obviously don't play it in the main just because it conflicts with the Super Heavies, but great card for the side to steal stuff, get extra draws, play through hand traps, etc. 3 copies of Imperm. I was a big fan, and I still am a big fan of Dark Ruler No More, but at least in this current iteration of the deck, I feel like Imperm is better. In the current metagame, I just feel like people are not ending on that many monsters. So even if you draw Imperm as a 6th card, it almost will operate like a Dark Ruler No More. For example, in like the Voiceless Voice matchup, you can just go to Imperm the Ritual, they negate it, okay. That's almost just as effective as if you had just Dark Rulered their whole board. So this also then, of course, has the advantage of if you draw it in your opener, you can try to shut down their combo from ever happening in the first place. So that's my reasoning for why we opted to go with Imperm. Of course, it's also not once per turn, etc. Then we got the 3 copies of Evenly Match. So Evenly Match was what I ended on because it operates kind of like Dark Ruler No More as a board breaker going second option, but it also has some of the advantages of things like Lightning Storm and Harpies because it deals with back row. So I feel like it's a nice compromise. It has a lot of power incorporated into one card that it can deal with back row. The fact that it banishes, it really helps with the Voiceless Voice matchup. I know that they can still rebuild their field, but it helps against a lot of these matchups where they have some of these extra cards. It also helps, especially because a lot of people are siding against Summon Limit. so this helps a lot against summon limit. Yeah, evenly played really well for me, so it's gonna stay for now, but we can always change to other options. And then we got the 1 copy of Karakuri Cash Shed. This is for whenever we're going first after game 1. That's when you side this card in. And the reason is because this card deals with things like Dark Ruler No More and Evenly Match, which are 2 cards that can out your board. So the fact that it's a recruitable card that can stop Dark Ruler, which is a huge problem for the deck, is great. It also can stop Forbidden Droplet, which that came up in the event that I played, where someone Forbidden Droplets, they drop a spell on a monster, and you Cash Shed, and that's you basically just win the game on the spot. So definitely worth the slot. I realize people are not playing as many board breakers in the current format, but I still think it warrants the spot. And there you go. So that's the card by card. I can sort of hear myself losing a little energy here. Sorry, but that's the card by card breakdown. So I hope the details that were given were helpful there. I know we didn't spend much time on the hand traps. I tried originally triple Ash, triple Droll. I ultimately decided that Droll, sometimes it can end people's turn on the spot, but other times it just feels not very impactful if you don't have another hand trap to pair it with. So I ultimately just decided to go with what I felt was the most power isolated in one card that felt non-situational. It's just always going to get me something. I can always just slow them down a little bit with an Ash or a Veiler, even if they power through it. And that's what we ended up going with. So now that I've showcased that, I do really quickly just want to give you guys an option. Again, I briefly showcased this during the profile, but if you missed it, if you wanted to play a version with more hand traps, just know that you absolutely can. That this deck did have a big weakness in its original version without the super heavy samurai cards, where we didn't have access to a lot of non-engine. And now, because we have 6 1-card starters, we have gained that advantage to where if we wanted to, we could run a lot of non-engine. And now that we've done all that, let's just go ahead and jump into some test hands so I can show you guys how the deck actually works. So first test hand here, you can see if we were going second, we've got at least 1 Ash Blossom to try to slow them down a little bit. And if we were playing like a less greedy version with like more hand traps, then we could have something else in this cash-in slot. Going first, this is a great hand. We know that we have our 1-card combo with Wakwashi, and we have Inishichi. If we Inishichi and that gets hand trapped, we have a backup we already have the Kunamzan in hand. And we have Cash-in hand, which is really our 2 primary search targets. So we would actually just open up with Inishichi. This makes us a little bit more weak to Nibiru, but the reason is because if they Ash or Imperm or Veiler, we want them to use it right here, because whatever we're searching is quite frankly not that important right here. We'll just go ahead and grab another Inishichi. Then we can do our 1-card combo with the Wakwashi. So play the Benkei from the deck. Now that we control a super heavy, we can search. You'll notice that I'm putting things in these 2 zones, which does make you a little weak to things like Relinquished Anima. But the reason is because I like to be in the habit of leaving these zones open for Clifford Genius. And now we can go ahead and activate the Soul Gaia booster to equip. Again, just kind of like a play pattern, I try to keep the equip in a different zone than my monsters, just to help play around Imperm. Just a good habit to build. So we go straight into our Brado. Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2. Because we haven't used a Vernisylph yet, this effect is still live, and we're able to put it into a Pendulum Zone. Now we could go ahead and Nishipachi. Nishipachi would get us a draw. We don't mind we could play it here, but we don't mind because we know we're gonna use it. Now we have a few options. We have the Pendulum part live, which is great, and We also have access to going straight into the gearbox. And we can use this to go into Tunneler. And now we can go into Genius. And we can actually bring out basically our whole hand. Now, if we didn't have the Ash Blossom in hand, we could have played it a little differently to not even use Genius, and then we could have put the Nishipachi in like a different slot. But we can use this to grab Regulus. We can go straight for level 7. We can also just go level 8 first. Just to make sure we don't draw into this. Get an extra normal summon. Just get some Vernisil fodder for the future. And now we can start step synchroing. So this is a little bit of an unconventional line. You know, most of your games are not going to play out quite like this. But this just shows you how many lines the deck truly has, whether it's Vernisylphs, whether it's Pendulum Summoning, whether it's the Katakuri line, whether it's the Super Heavy Samurai line. You can see you have like tons and tons of options. So now we could just go for the Banish just to get the extra draw here. We can go ahead and use Tunneler. Now, because of how our board is set up, we know that we have a level 9 that we can go into right here. So if we go level 9, we can put, if we put Nanishi back in the deck, 3 and 5 will be 8. And then we can bring out the Nishipachi, which 2 and 3 will make Naturia Beast, and then we'll get an extra draw. So we want to put these back, which is normally something we don't want to do. But in this case, for the reason I just outlined, it makes sense. So that we can make sure that we get 3 draws instead of 2. Probably draw into a Vernisylph. Yeah, double Vernisylphs. So now we can get even more draws. See what we go into, and then use that to determine how we want to end our board. So I think that this hand and this playthrough kind of demonstrates some of the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. In a 9-round event, I will say this deck is pretty mentally demanding. I don't feel like I truthfully really misplayed with the deck throughout the event that I played in, but I could definitely see how it would be difficult to play this deck through 9 full rounds. So we want to go ahead and just see what we can draw here. And we drew a Flourishing Hills, which is great. Now again, there's so many options for how we could choose to go through with this whole thing. But I think, frankly, all we really need to do is set up a Baronne de Fleur, and then we'll be able to get access to our Regulus. So we can just start pitching cards that we don't really need. Grab a level 1 tuner to make a Baronne de Fleur. We could Misting Seedling, but in this case it's better to just use Flowering Fields. We can actually just go ahead and add Misting Seedling back to our hand just to give us follow-up for next turn. Bring back the second Berebu, both of which will be live because we can trigger one with our Quick Effect from the grave and one with our trap card. And then we can just go ahead and summon our Regulus. So here's our fairly standard end board. Sometimes you're not going to be on double Berebu. Sometimes you'll end on like a Fenrir or a River Stormer or something like that. But this is what you're generally trying to get: Naturia Beast, Appaloosa, Regulus, Berebu, and then 2 other bodies. Sometimes it's going to be Berebu Baron. Sometimes it's going to be Berebu and River Stormer. Sometimes it's going to be Baron River Stormer. And yeah, you try to draw into as many hand traps towards the end as you can. So Veilers and Ash Blossoms. And this is really the advantage of the deck. Having 3 monster effect negates, having essentially 7 spell negates, 2 omni negates, and 2 quick effect banishes, all while protecting your defense position monsters from battle. Back up with hand traps makes it a fairly unbreakable board. And again, if our opponent had the chance to side deck against us and we were going first, this cash-in would be a anti-Dark Ruler No More, anti-Forbidden Droplet type card. So let's go ahead and reset and try a second hand. Again, a pretty standard hand. You can see we've got 2 of our starters. We've got Stampede. This is another example of how Stampede can kind of play nice with the deck. If certain things get interrupted, it just works well with these cards. And we got 1 Effect Veiler. In case we go second, we can at least slow our opponent down a little bit and see how it goes. So we would just lead off with our Wakashi. Because we already have the Soul Gaia booster, we just go straight into that play. One good thing about this build, since we do go for River Storm, or since we go through the Infinity Track Tunneler, we can always bring this Soul Gaia booster back towards the end just to use as Pendulum or Vernisil fodder. So drawing it doesn't necessarily mean we won't still get that +1 later on. Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2. Get our draw, see what we get into. And now we have 2 Vernisylph starters. We also have our Railroad Stampede that we can always just normal summon. If we don't mind just burning the normal summon here, we are going to have plenty of access for draws. I am just going to go ahead and use the normal summon because there's really not much else that's going to get this kind of value off of a normal summon. We can go ahead and Step Synchro. We Step Synchro with the other one first just to keep the level modulate live. If we really wanted to, we could put this in this zone just for Clifford Genius purposes, but I can already tell I'm going to end up using it before then, so I'm not worried about it. But just as like a general play pattern practice, you could put it there. And then, same type of thing, we're going to Step Synchro. I try to be in the habit of putting one of the Beredos up here just to leave room in case we end up having to, in case we get interrupted at a weird spot and we have to Pendulum Summon when we didn't necessarily think we were going to. Now, we could get a draw here while leaving both of these live, so that way we can get like 2 searches for 2 different Vernisylph cards. But I'm actually going to go ahead and just use one now just to get access to another draw. Now, whenever we draw motorbikes like this, we can use it just to thin the deck if we want to, just so we don't draw into more Wakashis later. Sometimes you want to leave it just because it makes a good Pendulum Summon card to pair with your Beredo to make a Baron de Fleur. So in this case, we're going to leave it right now. Go into 9. We can go ahead and grab a Ninishi. We can go ahead and grab our Ballista. Which is going to search for our Gearbox, which is going to add our Inishichi. And this is how we can very consistently make sure that we get Naturia Beast, and it's also why we play the Trap card, just because we prioritize Naturia Beast, we prioritize this play line. so we're almost always going to get this search off, and so it's just a lot of power to be giving up if you decide to cut it. And now we can just go that beast. Now, if we want to, we can go for the Clifford Genius right here, because we know we have access to Tunneler already in our hand, which means if we use the Vernisylph for the Foolish effect, we can use it for our other Infinitrack card, Road Roller, in order to come back to get access to Regulus that way. So we have different options for how we want to get our access to Regulus. We know we have at least 2 summons off of the Flourishing Hills, plus we know we have access to stuff with the Pendulum Summon. So tons of options right here. We're going to go ahead and just use this. Now, we could use Awakening Forest to guarantee that we get access to the extender, or we can use Thawing Mountains to try to draw into more hand traps or potentially draw into more extenders later. In this case, I do think it's better just to guarantee with the Awakening Forest. And we're actually going to go for the play that just gives us an extra draw. We are going to just thin out the deck here. Because we already know that we essentially are going to end with a great board, regardless of how we choose to end it. And again, this is one of the strengths of the deck, is how non-linear the combo lines are. So like if you know that you're going against a deck where you really need an Omni Negate, you can prioritize getting a Baron de Fleur. If you're going against a deck where getting the River Stormer turn their stuff to defense and make their defense lower by 1,000 is a priority, you can do that. If you know it's a deck super weak to Appaloosa, which is a lot of decks, you can prioritize getting to that. So it's a little bit flexible on how you want to choose to end your board. But now we can go ahead and make our Appaloosa, Tunneler, again, we know that we can search if we don't hard draw into it. And we drew into Kanamzan, which is a great draw because it's going to work with our Road Roller. But even if we didn't draw into this, we still had some different things we could do. But we don't control a super heavy right now, so we can't get the search. That's one of the advantages sometimes, to where if you do decide to not pitch the Wakwashi, sometimes you bring out the Motorbike to get that extra search at the end. But right here, we just have the River Stormer play. So yeah, we're going to have River Stormer with the Road Roller underneath to make them keep their stuff in defense and lose 1,000. And we just add the Regulus. Didn't draw into any of our, extra Ash Blossoms or anything like that, but that's fine. And you can see a pretty similar end board to last time. Main difference is instead of having the extra Omni Negate, which is generally better, we have the River Stormer, but it is River Stormer with the Road Roller underneath it. And keep in mind, River Stormer can have its own advantage, when you run stuff over by battle, the fact that you can equip it. So yeah, second round, there you go. And let's get at least one more test hand in here, or maybe we can just flip through some hands just to kind of showcase the advantages and disadvantages and like what you would do with them. So again, pretty standard hand. It would play through very similar to last time. You already know we've got access to the Super Heavy Samurai line. We got access to the Katakuri line. We have at least one Vernisylph extender, not necessarily a starter, but we know that this is going to get us access to Tunneler, which is going to let us get a bunch of extra draws. We're probably likely to draw into one of our 5 Vernisylph starters, or even just one of the other extenders, and keep it going. And we have at least one Veiler if we're going second to slow them down, etc. And this is another good example that just shows why Railroad Stampede is a pretty good card for the deck. And this also, just as like an example of another card that is really good and has its own unique advantages. Um, some of the cards that I'll be putting towards the end of the video when going into other options for the deck. Something like Machina Metal Cruncher right here, instead of if it was in the slot of this Railroad Stampede, you could summon it and get access to Motorbike. But if that gets drolled, etc., now your Motorbike becomes dead. Or if you try to Motorbike first, it's like duplicative. But so this is really good because now if you go to Motorbike and it gets ashed, you can just normal summon the Stampede, get back Motorbike, level modulate, boom, boom, you're good. So really flexible cards. And of course, we got a couple hand traps to... usually Ash plus Valor is going to put your opponent in a place where you can play through their stuff. So... another opening hand here. We got one of our starters, which is great. We got a couple of different extenders in case we run into some problems. And we do have a Fenrir just so we can put something up on the board. Now, I will say this hand does have some issues if you get like Ash or something here on the Motorbike because you don't have access. You lose access to a non-tuner. But let's go ahead and play this one out just a little bit. So, I mean, you would do the Fenrir. You actually wouldn't search first. I just kind of did that. I just did that a little bit automatically. You would normally do the Motorbike first, but actually, I was actually right. In this hand, you would go Fenrir first because if they droll, you just don't want to play anything else. If this was a Wakiwashi, you would do this first because then if they droll, by the time they droll, you already have the Soul Gaia booster in hand and you can normal summon. But if they if you have the Motorbike, then you actually do want to just bait the droll with Fenrir and leave all this stuff for like a follow-up play. And then you know how it goes from here. You would just go ahead and summon your Wakiwashi, search your Soul Gaia booster. Now, the fact that you have this Nishipachi in hand, which is normally the main card that you'd want to pull out of the deck, is no problem, because essentially what you do is you just pull out the level 1 tuner, and then you normal summon the level 3. Or, depending on the circumstances, you could even pendulum summon, but you normally want to save that for if you get like Nibiru or whatever else. So, especially if you don't have Inishichi worth normal summoning in hand. So, normal summon. And it's going to play out very similarly. Now, if you didn't have Vernisylphs in your hand and you really wanted to, I mean, you'd already be getting into Nibiru range. And a lot of times people are going to, anytime they see that you have the materials to make a Baron de Flor, they're generally going to just immediately Nibiru you. And as you can see, you have stuff to do some recovery. But if you wanted to, you could go for like a Baron de Flor and then just go level 9 and do for like a more simplified state board. But we're going to just keep pushing. Grab the level 5. And then this is going to be just very similar to what you're already familiar with, where we try to get 2 level 8s on the board first. Now, I always get a little bit hesitant to use the Fenrir as a Vernisylph target because it's so great to link this off and then pendulum summon the second Fenrir and use it as like an end board piece. But we have the Flowering Field, so we can always get it back if we really care that much. So get the Bredo, get the double draw. We already hard drew the Inishichi, so we're going to be able to just bring out the level 3 tuner and then normal summon this. And that leaves us open for recruiting the Tunneler, which is great because we don't have access to pitching it to the grave. So now we can grab the trap card. So you can see how each game is a little bit different, and you have to be a little bit flexible to play the games differently, but it's still the same basic and like the same basic beats that you're trying to hit. You're trying to get out Nishi, search an Inishichi or hard draw it to get your trap, to make sure that you get access to your Naturia Beast. You're trying to get access to your Tunneler either through Vernisylphs or through Ballista to set up your draws. You're trying to make sure you get at least one Beret boost stuck to the board. All that kind of stuff. So now we have a few different options here, which is something I tend to say a lot. We can just go ahead and do the Naturia Beast first. And then if we want to, we know we have Vernisylphs to bring stuff back. We can set up a Clifford Genius play. And this also has the advantage of freeing up 3 zones. And see, we haven't used our step synchro this game, and we only have 2 of these out. So we know we can step synchro here. Now, this is actually a great time to tunneler, just because we know we can go level 8, summon a Nishipachi, get a draw, and then we can go into Baronne de Fleur, we can link off into Appaloosa. We got basically the whole thing set up. It's up to if we want to, we can set it up to synchro into another Berebu, or we can just leave one Berebu for bringing back with Flowering Fields, which I think is the play here. So we just make sure we leave one Berebu, and we just make sure we put back the Nishipachi because we're about to use it to get a draw. And we haven't even gone through our whole Vernisylph line. So you can see the extenders are just crazy. You can essentially pick your own end board based on what you need for the given game. More draws, try to hit an Ash Blossom. There you go, we got the Ash Blossom. We can go ahead and just Appaloosa this away. We know we've got plenty of extenders based on like whatever it is that we need. We can just set up like a Baronne de Fleur, a Berebu, and like a Regulus. If we wanted to, we didn't have to leave this on Fenrir, but I actually kind of like Fenrir. So again, if we really wanted to, we could have used like a level 3 tuner and Fenrir to go into Baronne, and a level 1 tuner and a level 8 to make a second Berebu. So this could be a Berebu instead of a Fenrir, which is arguably a little bit better, but like I said, I kind of like Fenrir actually. So, and it leaves another Berebu in the extra deck for us to like play with, to potentially like synchro into with later. So there you go. Basically the same kind of end board, and you still have your hand traps. You got stuff to back you up, and I mean, you can see how even if we got interrupted several times, we would still be able to sort of build our generic end boards there. So I think that kind of goes to show, you know, what the deck can do. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other card options that we may want to consider to potentially optimize this deck even further. So now that we took a look at a few test hands and how some of the lines work, I just real quick wanted to illustrate for you. Like I said, these are the 11 cards that are almost always going to get sided in. These are the ones that are always sided out. I did just put that together visually for you so you can see what that looks like. It does make siding in events very quick. You kind of just know what you want to do in almost every game. Only real exception is if you need to change your extra deck with things like Barkion, or if you want to use Magical Hound. You got Gaga Cowboy. Oh, in this version, I'm missing my my Underworld Goddess. This is a version I was playtesting with Saratobi, which will come up here in a minute when we dive into the think tank. But I just wanted to illustrate for you what it looks like when you're siding in all this stuff. And moving on, I kind of want to dive into what I call the Karakuri think tank here. Just sort of explore what are some other options for the deck. What are some cards that you might want to consider if you're trying to iterate this deck and improve it further. So starting with cards that I consider some main deck options. Of course, you can always side deck hand traps, but these are some cards for consideration for the main deck. The first one is Machina Metal Cruncher. Machina Metal Cruncher is a card I've included in my playtesting in different iterations of the deck. You could include it really at any number from 1 to 3. It is a hard once per turn effect, so it's going to get diminishing returns after one copy. But this is a really interesting card because it's another one card starter for the deck. So especially if you're playing a version that runs more hand traps and you're trying to cut out more engine cards, this is another one card starter you can use for the deck. And the reason why is because you can use it to grab a copy of Super Heavy Samurai Motorbike, which, as we know, is a one card starter. So the fact that this can just summon itself to the board, get you Motorbike, and then get your plays going, and it's going to give you another link fodder for Ballista or for Clifford Genius, makes this a really attractive card. Another thing that makes it really useful, even if you're playing the extended version of the deck, is that it works with Vernisylph cards. So because it can be used off special summon, you can just use it with a Vernisylph, then use it as link fodder, and when you summon it, you'll get the effect to try to grab you either a Roadroller or a Regulus to your hand. So it's a great card, definitely worthy of consideration. I ended up cutting it just to maximize more Vernisylph starters. I was running 2 and 2 of the Vernisylph starters with a Metal Cruncher, and I just replaced it for a third Flourishing Hills. And the reason is because it has a little bit of conflict with Fenrir in the opener, and then also in the opener, it gets punished by basically every hand trap. So you can you can use it to bait out hand traps, which is great. That's an advantage to the card. But sometimes it gets punished. So for example, Droll, you use this to grab your Motorbike, which Motorbike already has some problems with Droll. But then you just instantly get Drolled, and that's the kind of situation that can just end your turn. Whereas some of your other lines you can not completely play through Droll, but you can still set up powerful boards like Berebu plus Naturia Beast with a trap card even through Droll, whereas Metal Cruncher you can't do that. So that's one problem with the deck, and of course it can get Veilered, Impermed, Ash Blossomed. It can basically just get hit by everything, but it's still a one card starter, and it can be used off the Vernisylphs, so it's worth thinking about for sure. Next, we have Infinitrack Harvester. This is a card that I had in my sort of think tank, you could say, for my last deck, and a lot of the same stuff still applies here. It's an interesting card. It works off normal summon. It works off Vernisylph, so you can use it to get a free search from the deck for one of your Infinitrack extenders, and then you can just link it off for link fodder. It can also level modulate. We're not really running a lot of XYZs in the deck, so it doesn't get a lot of value with that. But it's still an interesting card and one worth thinking about. It's just I don't think we have the space to play this kind of thing. But still an interesting card worth thinking about. And then I just put some hand traps here. You could also include Ghost Mourner. Ghost Mourner is a card that I've run before, and it can also potentially help you in time. So I mean, you can include all of any real hand trap, especially the 3-star tuner hand traps. You could include here. I was running Droll. I was running Ghost Mourner for a period of time. I never really ran Nibiru. I tried playtesting it a little bit, and quite honestly, I just feel like I as a player maybe am not great with Nibiru. I think I maybe telegraph it too much at a live event, and I think that it adds a lot of cognitive overhead to you as a player. When you're thinking of how to play around different lines with Nibiru, it just requires a different thought process. And so I prefer the play style of just playing like the Imperms and the Evenlies, but you can certainly go for something like Drolls and Nibirus, or even just more single interaction hand traps like Ghost Mourner or Ghost Spell. Ghost Spell is a card that I was also playing, I almost always play this card at least at one copy, but I ended up deciding to cut it, and if I might consider adding it back at one copy. It's great because if you're playing the Vernisylph package and you're playing Flourishing Hills and well, of course, Flourishing Hills the starter. Uh, but if you're going into Flowering Fields, that's the card I was thinking of. If you're going into Flowering Fields, you can add this back to your hand, which is really great, especially if you have to use it for like Link or Synchro Fodder, or just as like Vernasil fodder, like early on to get your combos going. When you start to end your board, you can add this back to your hand, which is super useful, especially against a lot of the top decks. But I ultimately decided to just play the triple Veiler, just because I felt like Veiler was more useful if I lose the die roll in the opener, and that's really what I was more concerned about for my main deck hand traps. But definitely consider Ghost Bell. It's an Earth. Yeah, it's Vernasilf summonable, and so it's one of the high contenders. And then again, Ghost Ogre, same type of thing. It's a 3-star tuner that plays well with the deck. Obviously, it's not Earth, but you can use it to interrupt the board. Unfortunately, the way a lot of the decks work right now, destruction is not the best way to go against them. And also, once a lot of cards get their effect off, they're not that useful anymore. So the fact that it doesn't negate just makes it not an ideal option, but it's definitely worth considering. So these are the main things that I thought of for the main deck that I've been tinkering around with. Let's go ahead and jump into the extra deck here. So you can see I've listed quite a few options. There's a lot of stuff worth thinking about. I'm sure there are other ones that I haven't even thought about yet, or ones that I thought about but didn't bother to include here. The first one is Sarutobi. So this is a great option, particularly when you're dealing with time. So the fact that it's a generic, well, it's not generic. The fact that it's a level 8 Earth machine synchro, so we can get it out pretty easily with our deck, makes it very valuable. And the fact that we can use it to pop our own pendulum scales to deal 500 damage to the opponent, so we can do 500 on our turn, end our turn, and then their draw phase, we can do an extra 500 by popping our other pendulum scale, means that net, this card can do 1,000 damage, and that's not including, the fact that it could pop your opponent's spell or trap cards. So it's a great utility card because it could pop their spell or trap cards. It gives the deck an extra option to deal with back row, and it can be useful in time. So this is probably the head contender for a card I'm considering. The main reason I decided to go with Gaga Cowboy over Sarutobi is just because this needs a non-tuner super heavy samurai to synchro into it, which for us basically means we are going to have to use either Soul Gaia booster, or we're going to have to use Musashi from the extra deck. And I just felt like that was a little bit too restrictive if we end up not being able to get access to those when we need it, especially if we get cut off with hand traps, whatever. Then not having access to damage could just cost us the match. So the fact that all the Vernasilf cards can get you access to Flourishing Hills, or even to Awakening Forest, so you have all these extra level 4 options, or you can use, the tuner, Super Heavy Samurai, or Pegasus, or Wakwashi. There's just so many more options to go into Gaga Cowboy, so I decided to go with him. But this is still worth thinking about too, because you could always combine both of them to essentially deal 1,800 damage. 1,300 in a turn or in one phase, and then if you have long enough, you can end your turn and then pop 500 during their turn, so you can do 1,300, which that'll help play around like Flaunderies and stuff, like some of these decks that can actually gain life points with their engine. So great card, worth thinking about. Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon. This is here sort of as an honorable mention. It works. It's a bread and butter card in Super Heavy Samurai to make a Baron de Fleur very easily. The reason we don't consider this card as much is, number one, it just takes up extra deck space as like a filler card, as like an in-between card, and our extra deck's just a little bit tight for that. But number two, because we play the Vernasilfs, and so even if we made an early Baron de Fleur, we can't activate the negate effect if we go into our Vernasilf line. So that's just one of the pros and cons you have to consider with Vernasilfs, is that you use the utility of a card like this. But it's still worth thinking about, because you can always make an early Baron de Fleur and then just use a super heavy or a Katakuri line. No, this is actually our older version of the deck. Shout out to the old version of the deck. But we can go into Baron to Floor, and then we can use a super heavy or a Katakuri line, and we can just kind of basically not use the Vernisylphs that turn. So I mean, we have options. It's an interesting card, but it just doesn't make the cut. Scrap Dragon. So Scrap Dragon's an interesting card just because it gives us generic destruction. Just pop one card your opponent controls. It's Earth, so it plays through. We can play it under Vernisylphs. It's a dragon, which is really the main consideration because we can use it with Revolution Synchron. So if we get something like Stampede or Gearbox or Soul Gaia Booster on the board, we can synchro with Rev Synchron in hand and make Scrap Dragon, which adds some utility to the card. But again, our extra deck's a little tight, and the chances of drawing into Rev Synchron are not high. We're not running tuning. This isn't a Synchron deck. So it ultimately doesn't make the cut for those reasons. But it's worth thinking about if we end up needing more generic destruction to pop stuff. Herald of the Arclight. Herald of the Arclight's an interesting card that we get access to with the Super Heavy Samurai engine by having Motorbike as a level 2 tuner that can, and having Pegasus and being able to level modulate. So you can Pegasus for the Motorbike and then level modulate and get access to Herald. You also have access to Herald through your level 1 tuners and your and some of your Vernisylph cards. So you can like Misting Seedling plus Shurikenichi and things like that. So you have access to this card, but again, it's light, so we're not going to be able to do it on our turn if we're under Vernisylph lock, which we probably will be if we're setting this card up. And it has to tribute itself for its negate, kind of like Regulus. But we're having to put in, 1 to 2 cards to get access to this. But having a macro effect can be an absolute game changer. And the fact that we can protect it with our Katakuri so they can't just run over it, it'll also probably invite a lot of misplays. So this is a really interesting card. I have playtested with it, and it comes up all the time if you include it in your extra. So you can, if this becomes like a really relevant card for the metagame, like an even stronger card for whatever reason, then we can definitely think about that. And the fact that it has just the generic macro effect can even let you play around certain hand traps, but it functionally just doesn't come up that way because you don't want to have your own stuff get banished. Going into the XYZs, we got Zeus. Zeus, of course, works great with our Tunneler. It works great with Typhon. It can just help get something else set up. But again, it just sort of takes up an extra deck slot, and it doesn't come up enough. We don't XYZ enough in our deck, so it just doesn't really come up. Hope Harbinger. This could also just sort of represent any rank 8. There's different rank 8s that you could do here. Because our deck can rank 8 very, very easily, and sometimes we even want to clear space by getting rid of our rank 8s. But because we have Clifford Genius now, we just have more ways to link and more reasons to link off that stuff. It just makes the rank 8s not as viable, and we prioritize getting Naturia Beast in our deck, so the spell negate is redundant. Super redundant when we are siding in our trap card that negates a spell or trap. So we just don't really need Hope Harbinger. There's some other rank 8s that you could use instead, like Felgrand and some of these other things that are worth consideration too. But ultimately, because we're going for like a link style with Appaloosa, we just don't really need the XYZ style. Abyss Dweller. This is a card that I'm very much considering adding. I like Abyss Dweller over Herald of the Arclight, even though it doesn't have the Omni Negate. Very much considering Abyss Dweller. Just the fact that we can activate this during our opponent's draw phase and just totally shut down their grave is huge. The fact that it's any level 2, or the fact that it's any 2 level 4 monsters, so it plays really well with all our Vernisylph cards, just makes this super, super live all the time. If anything, it's something worth considering cutting the Underworld for, even though I sung its praises. It's something that you could consider with Stormer, but Stormer just has a lot of utility. You could get rid of Typhon for it if you really wanted to. So some of those cards that are kind of more on the borderline, I think Abyss Dweller is on the same tier as those, and you could definitely slot this in as a very, very viable option, especially because, again, Motorbike can level modulate 4. It just makes these XYZ 4s super, super viable, and I'll be playtesting more with Abyss Dweller myself. Another one, Baguska. Baguska is an Earth, which is nice. We just always love Earth monsters. But a specific advantage with Baguska in our deck, so of course, because we're playing kind of, it's kind of ironic, because we're playing a greedy version of the deck, Baguska actually becomes a worse card, because we have so many engine options that our opponents are just generally not really shutting us down like that, to where we need to go into Baguska. But if you're playing the hand trap heavy variant of the deck, then I think Baguska becomes a much better card. But because you're not playing the Vernisylphs as much, you don't have as many opportunities to go into level 4 or rank 4. But I would say this is a good option, particularly for the hand trap versions of the deck. But one of the advantages that we have as a Karakuri deck, if you're playing the trap card, is you have a really cool interaction with Baguska and Karakuri Kashin. Sorry, I keep going to the old version of the deck. I'll close that. But Karakuri Kashin, because you can do this during your opponent's turn. You know, it's a quick effect. The fact that you can banish it and then target a face-up monster on the field and change its battle position. So, super useful, because you can use it to just change. You can use it to change Baguska's battle position, essentially like quick effect. So super useful and worth considering. Geargian X. This is a card that is kind of fills a slot similar to River Stormer, but it can't grab Regulus. So I don't think it really is worth that much consideration, especially because you need 2 level 4 machines, so you can't use it with your Vernisylphs. But it's still an interesting option, because if you get stuck, you can do things with your Wakashi, you can do things with your Soul Gaia booster, you can do things with Motorbike, you can do things with Stampede or Gearbox. You can do things with those cards to get access to it, and then you can use it to either get your Katakuri line or your Super Heavy Samurai line live, because you have starters that are level 4 or lower. So it's still a interesting card. It's still worth thinking about, but I feel like in practice it doesn't really come up enough, because in order to make this card, you probably already have the kind of cards that you need, or you can already get them. But it's worth consideration for sure. Going into the links, we've got Blackluster Soldier of Chaos. Interesting card. I like the fact that it's Earth, so we can use its effect under Vernisylph, and we can very easily link summon it using level 7 or higher, because we're gonna have these Beredos that are just lying around. So it becomes this non-targetable, non-destruction thing that can just run things over by battle, and you can banish a card on the field. So really useful card. The main problems I have with this card is, number 1, it needs 3 materials. So you can't just use like Gear Ballista plus Beredo to go into it. You have to Gear Ballista Beredo plus something else. So that's one problem. Number 2, one of the main advantages of this card is that it gives you access to a banish, but our engine inherently gives us spammable banish. So it makes the card a little redundant. But it's still a very interesting card by giving us sort of a tower that can't be targeted or destroyed. So depending on what the meta looks like, if targeted destruction effects become the main thing to worry about, then this would give us something really useful. But since people are already very conscientious of destruction effects with Fire Kings, I feel like they have other answers for this card. But it's still a very useful card to think about. And then, of course, Little Knight is Little Knight. I don't own one, but I've playtested a lot with it, and of course, it can be very useful. It can actually be useful just for your end board if you get cut off and you can't make an Appaloosa, but you still got some stuff lying around. You can just make a Little Knight, which can operate as a great like end board piece. So, of course, there are other things, but these are some of the main ones that I think are worth talking about. Probably the two biggest ones are Saratobi for time and Abyss Dweller, because it just shuts down so many decks. And then maybe third, Baguska. Those are probably the biggest ones, but all cards that are useful and worth thinking about. Going into the side deck, I don't know why I put the spells first, but some monsters. For hand traps, you got Spooky. This is again a great time card. I thought about playing this at the event even before I fully understood the new time rules, but ultimately decided I just didn't have enough space for something like this. But it's still an interesting card worth thinking about. I think our engine between Saratobi and Cowboy, I don't think we need to really consider this too much, but something to think about. Kaiju. So this is a card that you'll see in side decks for like the Machina style machine decks at top, and they of course have other ways to play nice at level 10 monsters and stuff. But this is an interesting card because we can always recruit it off of Clifford Genius or with Urgent Schedule. So we have ways to recruit this card, which is why I've playtested with it a lot. But quite honestly, it just almost never comes up. Like, recruiting it just almost never comes up. If you needed it to out something, you're probably not going to be able to get a Clifford Genius Pendulum Summon off. Especially going second, we take out the super heavy samurai stuff, so you're not going to be able to pull it off like that going second. The destruction effect is mostly, if you have like Gear Ballista and like Urgent Schedule and stuff, you can search it. But again, if your opponent's letting you get all that stuff off, then you probably don't have something that you need to kaiju that badly. So in practice, it just didn't really come up enough for me. But it's still something I'm thinking about, and depending on different circumstances and changes, it'd be certainly worth consideration. It doesn't feel like enough sometimes against like Raid Raptors, like the way that you have to play to recruit this card, unless you're like playing 3 of it and hard draw it. But it can still be useful against tower decks like Raid Raptor and Pearly and stuff like that, and it's just a generically useful card. Then we got Alpha. So Alpha just has a distinct advantage in Vernisylph decks. The fact that you can get some kind of board clear with it and have Vernisylph fodder is just always going to make this a card worth thinking about and an attractive card option. But you don't really have anything to pair with it, like Beast-wise, so you're only ever going to get 1 bounce with it. But depending on the meta game, it's actually super useful, and it's very much worth thinking about. And if we had more side deck slots, then I absolutely think it'd be a card worth trying out more. But because we're just so limited, and part of it is due to the way I'm playing the deck by kind of swapping out engines, swapping from a super heavy samurai engine to an urgent schedule engine. Having to replace like some engine with some engine in your side does limit your sideboard, which is one of the weaknesses of the way I'm choosing to pilot the deck and play the deck, or design the deck. But Master's a good card with the Vernisylph stuff. It becomes significantly worse, the less of the Vernisylph stuff that you're playing. And then Pank is Pank. It's an Earth, which is great. You can bring it back with Vernisylphs in future turns, which is great. Generic Destruction, which is great. Quick Effect, which is great. So definitely worth thinking about. It's just that destruction effects are not that great right now, and that's one of the main problems. And a lot of like the useful spell and trap cards can do stuff even if you pop them. So I don't know. Worth thinking about, but again, it's not recruitable in any way. You'd have to hard draw it. I'm opting to basically, instead of playing these kinds of cards, just play evenly matches. Then again, same thing here. More board breakers, back row, kind of front row, and then sort of in between. Again, I'm just opting to play evenly matches. Monster Reborn, great extender card, especially going second. Plus, you can use it to deal with a lot of graveyard effects. So you can essentially use it as an extender for yourself and a type of way to play around your opponent's board, or not necessarily their board, but the total game state. But I feel like it's just a little too... It just doesn't have enough impact on a single card in most cases. I'd rather play evenly. And then I actually played... I never said, but in my sideboard where I said I added Gaga Cowboy after the event, Called by the Grave is the card I took out. So in the event, I played one Called by the Grave in the side as my 15th side card. And, obviously great for hand traps. Plus, it can be useful for Princess and everything else. But I ultimately decided to cut it for the Gaga Cowboy to deal with time. But definitely worth thinking about. So that's it. These are the cards that I wanted to throw my hat in the ring with. Feel free to, post some comments about other cards that you would consider. And overall, going back to the deck here, let me know what you think of the deck. What changes would you make? Do you have any considerations just for the philosophy of the deck build? I ultimately decided to play it with 3 engines, a little bit more of a pile deck with some limited non-engine, but you can, and to side deck it with a kind of linear pattern. But you could choose to play more non-engine. You could, the Vernisylphs, like I said, very high risk, high reward. You could change the side pattern to where you don't take out all the super heavies. You don't need to put in things like Urgent Schedule, like an alternate engine. And then you can play more monsters, but then you just can't side as many of them in the same game. So you can play things like Nibiru or Droll or some of the board breaker monsters we talked about. So let me know what considerations you have, or if you think that maybe some of the extra deck cards are worth swapping out. And thanks so much for tuning into this series. I assume that once I have had more experience with the deck, as the meta changes, some new cards are released, and enough significant changes have been made to my list, then I'll be keeping you guys informed. And until then,